in everyday life, as opposed to, you know, as opposed to only in a certain situation.
Oh,
So, Richard, are you going to be settling, or will you be moving around soon? Because it's okay if you're moving around, but we are looking at you like one of the ghost hunters.
I'm settling down soon.
That's okay, but it's good to have your camera on. This will be fun.
Okay.
And if we get enough people, we will do breakout rooms on this.
Okay.
Pair up and do this. Give it another 2 minutes. But let's make some introductions. We have here Dobbin Buck, who is an old friend from Orlando. That's where we first met. And Dobbin has his own business. Dobbin, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Hey, I'm Dobbin Buck. I live in the backwoods of North Georgia in the Appalachian Mountains. I own a marketing agency. Um, uh, we have about 50 full-time employees that operate up here with me. Talented young people I'm honored to work with. And I met James at Richard Bandler's event in Orlando years ago and have been um, a practitioner of NLP and associated mystical arts in my personal life and business life, and I'm a fan of James, and he made a very strong impact on me early on. So I saw this come up and thought it'd be great to join in and gather some wisdom and some improve my methodology. So pleased to be here amongst y'all.
Excellent. And Dobbin, what type of application would you like to use this stuff with? Because it's basically cross application, but I want to make sure I'm covering what you want as well as everybody else in this.
Absolutely. So a couple of different areas that I'm particularly interested in. One, as always, is in business development. So in meetings that I'm in, where I am, influencing individuals, whether live or via virtual, I'm always interested in being able to, in an expedited manner, build trust and break through barriers at an expedited rate that maybe a limited amount of time only allows me a certain amount. So some practical methodology allows me to get where I want to get to, within that, to put the person in a state that is going to be conducive to me being able to serve them. The other situations where I think that conversational hypnosis also applies is that I'm also the guy that deals with, you know, workplace emotional trauma that employees are going through, or I am the guy that fires people, or I am the guy that deals with disgruntled clientele. Fortunately, I don't have a lot of them, but when I do, I'm the person that is honored to work with that. And so any tools that I have to where I can build someone's trust, confidence in me, and allow me to care for them, it's a really good thing. And a lot of the tactics that I previously learned have been helpful, and I'm always trying to grow that toolbox,
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay, terrific. Thanks, Dobbin. Joanne.
Okay. My name is Joanne Abrahamson. I live in Yonkers, New York. I've been a hypnotist for about 35 years. And I want to use conversational hypnosis in several ways. I'd like to use it in the pre-talk to give pre-suggestions for what I'm going to do. I'd like to use some of it for an induction. I'd like to use some of it for the post-hypnotic talk where I tell them what I told them. Mm-hmm. And then also an everyday conversation to persuade people.
Okay, terrific. Well, we're definitely going to cover that. Richard.
I'd like to use it in sales, persuasion, getting yeses,
Okay.
on the
Excellent.
phone and in person, and
Okay.
and also on the stage, telling
Okay.
stories.
Yes. Okay, terrific. So basically, let's give it a start. So there's a couple of a couple of areas around conversational hypnosis. Most of the time people think of conversational hypnosis and they're all thinking about uh, you know how Milton Erickson used to do it. Hello, Gail. You are connecting to audio. Hello, Gail.
Hi, James. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I am well.
We're making some introductions as well as kind of polling a little bit just to see what type of application that you would like to use conversational hypnosis in to make sure we cover it. So since you've just joined us, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to the group and what type of application you'd like to use, we can get started into this.
Okay. I have studied NLP and used NLP for last 5 or 6 years. I'm a master prac and I've taken the trainer's training, although I have not presented my first class. And part of the reason that I'm here is I want to make sure that my NLP is seamless and automatic when I do public speaking, when I coach folks, when I mentor, pretty much in everything and in my writing.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we will definitely be covering that in this as well. So essentially, what I've boiled down to, and really when I think about conversational hypnosis, again, most
Shut this light.
most people are actually, thinking in terms of what Milton Erickson did. And, obviously, he was a master at what he did, but, he was very much specifically in a context. His context was that he was doing therapy with people. And unlike what you see in the videos with him, for the most part, which are edited, some of his sessions would be something like 6 hours long,
Yeah,
and
that's a long time.
well, I don't think he had a lot going on where, he basically he had to amuse himself somehow, and he had a very willing victim, in the seat with him. So, he said, well, how do I fill up my day? I'm going to talk to this guy and do strange things with him. There's one where he actually hypnotizes a guy, and this is a 6-hour session. There's video of it where he paralyzes the guy's body from the neck down, and he has him awake, but he's paralyzed from the neck down essentially, and he's talking to him, and it's just very strange. And it's not really something that you can do in an everyday situation, because nobody's going to sit for a 6-hour session. Those of you who see clients,
Yeah.
you're not going to do a 6-hour session with them. I mean, it's
Who has that kind of time? Come on.
well, they don't want to necessarily pay for it all at once, right? So the model doesn't work in terms of what people expect, right? So people expect the model of, doing things by the hour, say, for example, and it's not our fault or anything like that. It's just the way society has set it up, where people think of therapy or something like that as an hourly thing where, and if you've ever taken it, you don't get the hour, you pay for the hour, you get 45 minutes if you're lucky. Right? So somehow you're paying for the 45-minute hour. I don't know, maybe it's the third oldest profession, because maybe that's how it works in there. So it really does boil down to some very simple things and simple tools that when you put them together becomes conversational hypnosis. and it's just an amalgam of these tool sets that you find in NLP, where you can leverage those things. You don't have to leverage them all at once, but when you do, it becomes very powerful and becomes that conversational hypnosis piece. Conversational hypnosis doesn't mean talking somebody into a trance, because unfortunately, that's where people get from watching what Milton would do. And it's not, yeah, he had very specific things going for and against him. Basically, I mean, he was for much of his life physically disabled. So he couldn't move a lot. He had, basically, but he did have kind of a rhythm to the way he moved. So he would kind of sway a little bit, which is hypnotic after a while. I mean, you look at how cobras, kind of sway, and they kind of hypnotize their victims, and he had this gravelly voice that was difficult to understand, in my opinion. And you have to listen very closely, because he's saying, I have something very important to tell you. And it's like when somebody whispers something, you have to pay really close attention. So what does that do in hypnosis? Right? It's the narrowing of focus and the deepening of attention. Right? You have to listen to him. So he's talking like, in a very gravelly voice and not very loud. Even in the early ones, he was pretty moderate in his tone. So you have to listen very closely. And so we can take some of those factors that are going into this and use them, but it's not nearly as difficult. I mean, those of you who've gone through practitioner training and master practitioner training, you'll see the Milton model. We talk about things like, selective restriction violations and, all types of things, generally not usable in terms of influence and persuasion. It's something you can use in, in a therapeutic situation. It's something you can use in a, metaphor situation, but it's not as usable in like an everyday situation, because you won't make any sense. Joanne, did you have a question?
No,
Oh, okay.
no, I'm fine.
Okay, so I've boiled it down to essentially 7 basically pieces. Okay. So the first one is improving the voice. And we can all improve our voices. So we have to have really good tonality and really good timbre when we speak in order for people to really want to listen. And I mean, anybody, I may be dating myself or something. Anybody ever watch the show The Nanny? What, with Fran Drescher? And she made millions of dollars. She doesn't really talk like that, with that very nasal voice. She doesn't talk like that. If you ever listen to her, really, she doesn't really talk like that. But it's distinctive, but it's not something you would want to listen to on a regular basis, especially if you want to relax. That was the basis of, of what made it funny. And so what we do is we have to learn to speak from our diaphragm in order to have a richer and more pleasing tone to our voice. And part of that is, it's something called timbre, which is the quality of your voice. And as you speak from your diaphragm and learn to relax and control the muscles in your throat, that allows you to create more resonance in your voice. Now, has anybody ever listened to the radio, like sports on the radio or talk radio and things like that? Now, the ones who are really, really good have really good tones to their voice. They're very pleasing to listen to. Now, that's not the same thing as like shock jocks and things like that, like the morning, zoo shows where they're just trying to get, to get a certain reaction from you. But if you listen to the newscasters, if you watch the news programs, generally they have very, very good voices, and that they go to school for that. And it's the same way actors go to school when they want to improve their voices. And it's very important that we have really good, pleasing tones in order for people to want to listen and to be drawn into a trance. Because we're not pushing them into trance, we're inviting them to come into a trance. We go first and they follow. They're not going to follow if you say, hey, close your eyes. Now take a deep breath and relax, because it doesn't allow you to relax. And so that's why it's really important as we go through this to start learning to breathe from our diaphragm. So the question is, where's the diaphragm? Well, if you go down the front of your chest and go just below the rib cage, about 2 fingers, and you breathe in, if you just put your fingers there, just below the rib cage, you'll feel an arch, and it's a little bit below there. And when you breathe in through your diaphragm, you'll notice that you're pushing against your fingers. And when you feel that, that's when you're breathing through your diaphragm. Now, the odd thing is that when you sleep, you actually end up breathing through your diaphragm. And when you're a baby, you naturally breathe from your diaphragm, but at some point it switches and you start breathing into your chest. But opera singers and people who sing a lot learn to breathe from their diaphragms in order to be able to save their throats and their vocal cords. Because the whole point is that it acts like a big bellows, where if you take in the breath through your diaphragm and start pushing it out across your vocal cords and relax your throat, you'll notice that your tones become rounder and become more resonant, just like they would on the radio. So let's try it. One of you just, Dobbin, you want to try it?
Absolutely.
Just like that.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely. I
it's
agree.
practically perfection right there.
It sounds great. And it's basically comes down to feeling the muscles that are right here on your throat. And Joanna, a little higher on your throat. You see where my fingers are? At the base of the throat on the sides. You'll feel, if you relax the muscle, you'll feel there's a vibration there as the air passes over the vocal cords. And the more you relax it, the more resonant your words will be. Want to try it? You're on mute.
Relax every muscle, every nerve in your body.
Okay, so now just relax these throat muscles just a little bit more. You'd
Relax
right here.
every muscle, every nerve in your body.
Right. You notice how it's more resonant. You'll feel the vibration coming from your diaphragm across your vocal cords, and it goes into your client. They'll feel that vibration. All right. Richard, do you want to try it? relax. Relax these muscles right here. You see? Okay, now speak.
James, let's meet. Let's meet and have a nice juicy steak like last time.
Yeah, that was good. When we met we met up in the Atlanta area, inside the perimeter of Darwin. It was still on the edge of the perimeter. We actually went to Fleming's, great steakhouse. We had we were well taken care of there. So if you have a Fleming's near you, they do a very good job. That's good. Gail, are you there?
Of course I'm here, James.
Okay. So why don't you give it a shot?
I want some of that steak too.
Well, where are you, Gail?
I am south of Los Angeles, and
Oh,
wouldn't
they
you
have
know it,
Fleming's.
there's a Fleming's about 2 miles from me.
I highly recommend Fleming's.
They're excellent. Now I'm going to be dreaming of cows.
Well, it's kind of the, depends on the kind of the product life cycle of the cow. This is towards the end.
Something in a package, please. Nothing that moves.
That's right. And well, unless you go to the Fleming's and they serve you.
Working on that. We just had our restaurants open.
Excellent. Well, that's a good place to start.
It is, isn't it? I have my bib on. I'm ready to go.
Excellent. Mark, why don't you give it a shot?
Good evening, everyone.
Okay, so
I don't know if there's any Flemings around New York, but now I'm hungry and curious.
well, I'm sure there's one somewhere, or there's other really good steakhouses there. So the first thing is developing that really good tonality. And the way we do that is actually to make sure that we're breathing from the diaphragm when we want to speak and not taking too big a breath, right? So it's not like you're going to go diving down underwater for, 20 feet. What you want to do is take a regular breath into your diaphragm, because if you take too big a breath, then you end up holding that breath. And what happens when you hold your breath? Your throat has to close up in order to keep it in. When your throat closes up, then your voice all of a sudden starts to get higher and higher and higher because the muscles aren't relaxed. So the first thing is to learn to relax the muscles around here at the base of the throat, right where I'm pointing to. And you'll be able to feel it when you put your fingers on it. And that just makes it a lot easier to get that really good tonality. Now, another way to help is also to sit straight and to bring your chin back just a little bit so you're more centered over your shoulders, as opposed to leaning forward like this, which many of us tend to do because we're too busy looking at computer screens all the time. And that's why, or somebody like Dobbin, who, as I recall, is quite tall. So I know you have to look down a lot of times, but if you want your voice to be a little bit better, just make sure you're a little bit more centered and a little bit more pulled back, because then all of a sudden it changes your voice. Now, listen to this. See, if my head is forward, my voice sounds like this. And as I speak and I bring it back, you notice the difference. Just by bringing my chin back. I don't have to bring my head up, but I need to center it over my shoulders a little bit more. So your posture will affect how your voice sounds. And especially if you're speaking on the phone, and nobody can see you, then it doesn't matter if you're sitting totally straight up in order for you to get your voice out properly. Any questions on that piece?
This is great stuff.
Well, this is just the beginning. The second piece to making your voice better is to slow down. Slow down how you speak. Because most of the time, we all tend to speak too fast. Because generally, we know what we want to say. So it's already in our head, and we're just getting it out. So it's a lot easier when you actually slow down for the other person to follow what you're saying. Remember, you're leading them into trance, conversational hypnosis. If you're speaking really, really fast, then it's really hard for you to keep up because I'm keep going and talking and talking and talking, and it sounds like I'm talking at you as opposed to talking to you. Dobbin, you have a question.
I'm tracking with you, and I'm normally quite slow myself in my native format, so this is great. But how does this apply to where when we're, if we're mirroring other people's rate of speech, or does that apply in this scenario?
It does. Okay, so if you're talking to somebody who speaks more quickly, right? You can start speaking more quickly, and then when you get to the part where you want to draw that person into a trance, that's when you can start speaking more slowly and start marking out the things you really want the person to know, right? And it's not weird, right? So it's then you start using emphasis and things like that and analog marking, which we will be getting to as we move forward. But you notice how that works, right? So that's where when you slow down, it allows you to pause as well. What does a pause do?
A pause allows for maybe a moment of contemplation. It also can add tension to uh, certain personality types.
Yes, and it adds anticipation,
There
right?
it is.
Because when you're listening to me speak and then I pause, you're waiting for me to finish. And as you wait for me to finish, all of a sudden that person is open to suggestion. So using pausing actually works really, really well when you're using conversational hypnosis. The problem is if you begin to speak really, really fast, and I'm speaking at this speed, which is normal for somebody from New York, and I stop, it's very jarring, right? Which all of a sudden it's like, well, come on, right? Because it's too far out of the rhythm and the cadence of how I'm speaking where it becomes foreign, right? But if I've just automatically started to slow down in my speech, then it's not weird. And the whole point of doing conversational hypnosis is that it's not weird, right? Because otherwise, then it's like, oh, look into my eyes, I'm going to hypnotize you, right? That's kind of the exact opposite of what we want to do in this type of thing, because we're trying to be more covert, in quotation marks in it. We're exercising influence and persuasion skills, and it's the same skills that you would use in the therapeutic area as well. So, or in a presentation or something like that. Now, especially in presentations, if you're speaking to a group of people are going to process what you say at the rate that they process it, right? you again know what you want to say. So that's already processed information. And so when you're conveying it to them, you have to allow them to process it. And it's not a matter of IQ or anything like that. It's just their preferred speed of processing and how long it takes them to make the connections. And if you go too fast, you leave them behind and they have to catch up, which is a very interesting thing because they're not actually listening to you literally.
Into an adventure.
That's right. It is an adventure. They're not listening to you literally. They're translating what you're saying against the internal dialogue in their head. And so it's kind of close. Sometimes it's closer than others, but they're still translating what you're saying through those filters they've already got. So when you slow down, you allow them to get closer to what you're saying. And when you pause, which is easier when you're going slowly or slower, it doesn't mean you have to speak really slow. We'll cover that. It's just slow down generally from the way you normally speak. Now, I know, Dobbin, you live in Georgia. People tend to speak a little bit slower in the South. And that's actually, but they do because they're picking your pocket at the same time. Yeah. But they do. And that's okay because, again, you control the rate that you're speaking at. And you can speed it up sometimes if you want them to follow you too. And again, that goes towards noticing if they're following you or not. So if they're already speaking slow and you start slow, but you speed up a little bit and they speed up, then they're really following you. Is that any questions on that piece? Okay, so the third thing in this piece is I recommend you get an oscilloscope. Okay, generally there are free apps you can buy for an oscilloscope. Does everybody know what an oscilloscope is? Yes?
No.
Okay, you don't know what an oscilloscope is. That's fine. An oscilloscope is it's basically something that has waveform. It shows you what a waveform looks like. Let's see. Oh, guess what? My app is out of date, so therefore doesn't work on this. But you can generally get an oscilloscope, in the App Store for Apple, definitely in the Google Play Store, and you can have it on your phone. The important thing to remember is to actually spread out the line so it's not all tight. Because when you speak, it's important then to see how your words sound. If it's very jagged, that's kind of the effect it has on the person's nervous system. When you round out the way you speak, when you round out the vowels, that's where you get the more pleasing sounds and you bathe the other person's neurology in really good sounds. So I would recommend using that as a tool just to practice.
Is it on your phone, James?
Yes. Well, obviously not the one that I had, which is no longer applicable since they updated yesterday.
What's it? So do you know which one I could get?
Well,
type it in.
there's an old one called O-Scope, but I don't know if that's still free. I do know that they have ones that are free and they have ones that you have to pay for. I think the ones, on Apple, sometimes you have to pay for them. On Google, they have a lot of free ones, so I would recommend you try to get the free one. They all work pretty much the same. And you would just, even say the vowels like A, E, I, O, U, and just try to get it as rounded as possible. Now, there are going to be some, like the consonants, that are a little bit more jagged, but that's okay. It's just overall, you want to be more rounded and have more space between the waves than you normally do. So as a tool, I highly recommend that because, again, it helps you get a better voice for when you're doing conversational hypnosis or just speaking in general, because whenever you're speaking, it's still conversational hypnosis. Hello, Shayna. Welcome. You're on mute, Shayna, if you said hello. All right. So the next thing that we're going to be talking about, because that was the first thing, is getting a better voice, is now using embedded commands and embedded questions. So who here knows what the embedded command and the embedded questions are? Yes, Joanne, you're on mute. I feel like I'm on the radio. Joanne, you're on mute.
Very hard to, on my phone, it's very hard to mute and unmute myself because it's so tiny.
Well, you can just leave it unmuted if you want.
No, because Robert's making noise in the background.
He might be saying something really interesting, or he might be heckling me. You never know.
Anyway, an embedded command is something to the effect that I know what you're thinking. Or let me think a minute. Embedded command. You should breathe more slowly, shouldn't you? And I'm marking the embedded command, breathe more slowly, with a long pause before I say breathe more slowly.
Well, yes and no, not quite. So the embedded command and the embedded question is actually used in the tonality of what you're saying, because a command tonality actually goes down in almost every language. I can't say it's every language because that may be false advertising. I'll have to ask Dalvin about that since he runs a marketing company. But for most of the languages that we're familiar with, when you make a command, it goes down, at the end of the sentence. And so an embedded command is basically a statement, which in statement tonality, the statement does not go down at the end. It stays even, right? A question goes up at the end, right? So we ask a question. It's like, oh, what type of bread is Robert making? Right? Goes up at the end. And, we all want to know, since, we all like fresh bread. A command tonality goes down at the end. Like if those of you who have pets, not fish, because I'm not quite sure fish can hear you, but dogs and cats, basically when you talk to your dog or cat, if you use the wrong tonality, if you say to a dog, sit down, the dog looks at you like, what are you trying to say? They have the best expression, so that they're like looking at you like, what do you want me to do? Because they don't know the words, but they understand the tonality. So when you say to a dog, sit down, the dog gets it, wants you to do something. You want the dog to do something. And so we react to the tonality more than the words. And guess what? Most of the time, as I said before, people are not listening to you literally. They're translating what you're saying and they're getting context around the situation, but it's the tonality that they react to. So in the embedded command, we might be saying things like, okay, as you begin to relax and close your eyes, you'll notice that everything's going to be okay. Right? And all of those had downward tonality at the end of them, but they're not saying, you should do this, you should do that. It's just a statement with the downward tonality at the end. All right. Now, the embedded question is even more interesting in that it's a question format, right, with a command tonality. So, an example of that could be, I'm not sure if you can begin to relax right now. Right? Or, I'm curious, did you have a really good day today? Right? So it's a question format, but the tonality is a command tonality. So if you were managing somebody and you said, well, I'm not sure if you're open to this, but we have a deadline, and would you mind staying late tonight? Right? Something like that, which is, it's a question consciously, but it's a command unconsciously for the person. Right? And I'm not saying you should take advantage of your employees, but sometimes you have deadlines. And when you're using it therapeutically, it's a softer way of giving the command. When it's, again, put together as a question, but the tonality is really important to go downwards. Any questions on this?
I could ask somebody, after we take a look at this, I'm not sure if it'll be right for you, or you may decide to sign up today.
Okay, so what's going on in there? Let's cover this, right? So essentially used in what's called a negation in it, right? So if you said, I'm not sure this is right for you, downward tonality, command is, this is right for you. The negation is, for those of you who don't know what a negation is, it's, we have to process the positive first in order to understand the negative of the sentence. So if, when you say, I'm not sure this is right for you, you're saying, I'm sure this is right for you, not. Right? So they first have to process, I'm sure this is right for you. And what was the rest of your sentence, Richard? Richard?
I'm just looking at, you may decide to sign up today. In that case.
Okay, so I'm not sure this is right for you. You may decide to sign today, or you may decide to sign tomorrow. Right? All of those had downward tonality. Any questions? Any other questions?
It seems sort of tricky because those aren't really questions to me. In other words, they aren't formatted.
Well,
they're
in that sense.
The person that's speaking has the internal query, but the formatting of the sentences given there weren't really questions.
Well, that's because you're reacting to the tonality of it. So I'm not sure this is right for you, but you could sign today or tomorrow. Just give a think to it. Right. So again, one of the things you have to understand about embedded commands and embedded questions is that a lot of people who study NLP and things like that, they study the embedded command and the embedded questions, and they study things like anchoring and all that type of thing. They think it's like a silver bullet. It's not. You do it once and then all of a sudden the person says, yes, master, I'll do it. You know, it doesn't work that way. It's like conversation. You stack them. You continually stack it throughout the whole process of what you're doing. So that's why anchors are built. Sometimes if they're immediate, but sometimes it takes a while for the person to actually react to them. So that's why it's important to do it over and over again to reinforce it. And in hypnotic terms, that's a process called fractionalization. Because when you fractionate the person, you're bringing them up and down out of the trance. And when you're giving the embedded command, you give the embedded command, then you talk about something else, then you're giving another similar embedded command, and it fractionizes. This fractionalization going on. The fractionation actually continues to drive that suggestion deeper and deeper. So it's not just a one-shot deal. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. That's where the conversational part of conversational hypnosis comes in. It's not just, zapping somebody and then all of a sudden they do what you want. Joanne, did you have something to say? Okay. So any questions on that? So that's where it's incorporating it into the way you speak that makes it much more powerful. Questions? Somebody was on chat. Oh, okay.
Other people's speech patterns, recognizing them in them. I don't think these people are considering them as an ambiguity. So I'm wondering, as a tool, am I contemplating this? Am I stacking them in my language just simply because those words have the potential to be ambiguous, getting them thinking a different way, but their specific use is individual ambiguities?
Sure.
You know where I'm going.
I know where you're going. So the processing of the ambiguity is really, really fast. The important thing is that you get them processing. It's not that they are going to process each and every category. It's that they are processing them. And it's the speed of thought. So it's really kind of opening up their mind to different things when you're saying it. And they're picking through the different possibilities, and they're picking the one because of context of what you're saying. And so what happens in that case is that the person actually starts getting used to opening up their mind to different types of things when you're giving them ambiguities, because they have to really process. So when you open up their mind to processing, that allows you to slide more stuff in, as opposed to somebody who's just very single tracked and is not even paying attention to what you're saying because they basically have one position. Does that make sense?
It does. So with just real quick, I don't mean to hang on this forever, but like when leveraging this as a tool, it seems like a lot for me. I'm a simple man, a lot to contemplate on top of a lot of other things, but what's the frequency of stacking these into one's dialogue? In other words, are you intentionally placing one every 2 sentences, or is it just sort of naturally?
I think the more you get used to ambiguities, the more they naturally start coming out. because you're not thinking in terms of ambiguities, you're more noticing that they exist, right? And so when you do things very consciously with ambiguities, you'll notice it most of the time in comedians, right? Because comedians use a lot of them. And so if you listen to, not prop comics, not Carrot Top, obviously, you know, but when you listen to the really interesting comedians and they're telling you stories, they use a lot of ambiguities because that's where a lot of the comedy comes in. So you'll notice, I don't know if you've ever listened to, watch Jeff Dunham, the ventriloquist. He uses a lot of that with his characters, right? Because it's funny, but B, you have to begin to process, and you start going along with it because you're processing. And that's basically what you're trying to do when any type of influence and persuasion situation, including therapeutic, which in my opinion is you're influencing the person to think differently. There's a tendency to want to go too fast. There's a tendency to want to jump from, I give you the command and you do it, right? And I'm going to learn hypnosis, and the person's going to do it because they see it on stage. The whole thing about influence and persuasion is that it's small steps and you gain momentum in that direction, right? So you have to get the person to accept that first step, then the next one, then the next one, then each step becomes bigger towards the end. So if anybody's ever seen a hypnosis show, right, they're doing these big, crazy things by the end of the show, but that's because they started out small. Oh, hold your hands like this and look between your fingers, and then all of a sudden, they start going closer and closer together, right? Which is actually a physiological trick, but it convinces them that they're hypnotized and hypnotizable, right? So that's the first step. And then they go, all of the hypnosis tests are those little steps to convince them that they can be hypnotized. And it's just like the influence and persuasion situation. When you gain rapport, it's the first step. You get criteria and values, the next step. You use the criteria and values, the step becomes bigger, right? And so each of those steps creates a bigger step to move the person along and gains momentum. But using the ambiguities is just one of those steps. And it's a way to get the person to start thinking more, as opposed to just concentrating only on one thing, which is, really hard to have a conversation with somebody who's only fixated on one thing. And by using it, you can get that going. It's also really good because getting somebody to laugh actually increases neuroplasticity. So that's what you're essentially doing, is you're massaging the brain to create more neuroplasticity. So I would suggest listening to really good comedians, besides the fact that really good comedians are more interesting than bad comedians. And so it's really another tool. Although I find when you combine the embedded commands, embedded questions with the punctuation ambiguities, that's very powerful, especially because you're linking things together. And we'll demo that a little bit later. So part of this now, it goes towards the actual, now that we've had some of the building blocks, right? One of the initial ways into conversational hypnosis is actually pacing the other person's reality, right? Which goes into the area of presuppositions and things like that. So, things like, as you become aware of yourself sitting in the seat, you'll notice that you can begin to relax and just go along with the sound of my voice, because you really want to learn some of the things I want to tell you right now. right? And it's just something very simple. It's pacing the reality of what's going on. Very useful in a therapeutic situation because the person's generally sitting in a chair. If the person's not sitting in a chair, then you have to tell them, make sure, because I've done this in bars and stuff like that, believe it or not. Somebody asked me, can you hypnotize me? It was actually in Orlando, of course, the bar outside. Those of you who are familiar with that. Said, hey, can you hypnotize me? I said, yes. He goes, okay, why don't you do it? He's standing there with a beer. So I just hypnotized him and I said, strong legs, strong back. So he just stood there holding his beer. Yeah, so if they're not sitting down, tell them to make sure they stay standing. Otherwise, they may just fall on you. He was a big guy, so not necessarily fun. But pacing the reality is actually something that's a very simple way to get into conversational hypnosis. And it's also the basis of the presupposition, right? So the presupposition is basically the first part of what I say has to be accepted as true, or it is true. It's paced to the reality, right? And in order for you to understand the full sentence, the second part has to be assumed or presupposed to be true. Does that make sense? So if I say the dog ran into the house, what has to be true for that to make sense?
You have to have a dog,
Yes, there has to be a dog.
and there has to be a house, and there has to be some context of there knowing what a dog looks like running into a house.
Well, the dog has to be able to run.
And the dog has to be outside the house.
Yes, the dog has to be outside. There has to be a way for the dog to run into the house. Otherwise, the dog can't run in the house.
Unless the dog is inside running in the house.
That is true. But, if you say the dog ran into the house, then the dog is already outside.
Correct.
Right. So a lot of has to be true in that sentence, be presupposed to be true in order for that to work. Otherwise it makes no sense. Right. So if you even look at things like, and this one is not banned as far as I know, the cow jumped over the moon because Dr. Seuss didn't write it. There has to be a cow, there has to be a moon, and the cow has to be able to jump over the moon, right? In order for it to make sense, and kids will accept it. Little kids love that type of stuff. They accept it. It makes sense to them. And so when you look at a lot of these things, they're written in terms of presuppositions. Now, what I use a lot is what's called the adverb-adjective presupposition. So obviously you're all here for a reason, and you're going to learn really good stuff tonight. Right? So the adverbs, obviously, you're all here for a reason. Right? True. Otherwise you'd be watching TV or something. And you're going to be learning really good stuff tonight. That is the presupposition. So if you're using it in conversational hypnosis, you could talk about, say, in Richard's case with real estate, obviously this is a great house for the right person. And in order for that person to get it, they have to move quickly. Richard, did you hear that?
Very nice.
Right? So it's a presupposition. It is, but a presupposition is also conversational hypnosis. It's part of it. Obviously, this is a great house for the right person. Who's the right person whenever you're speaking to someone?
Person in front of you.
Basically, right? And in order for the right person to get this house, you have to move quickly. Downward tonality. So you see how it starts to come together. Right? So the presupposition works really well with the embedded command.
Very nice.
Right? So why don't you give us one? Richard.
Can you just give me the format again?
Okay, well, in this case, it's a presupposition with an embedded command attached to it. And the embedded command can come in before. Or it could even be, the ambiguity. So if I say this, obviously this is a great house for the right person now. In order to get this one, you have to move quickly. So I put 3 things in that one. And you notice how easily they stack. Does that make sense? Questions? Because this is where it starts getting pulled together, where you're using the different skill sets in concert. Anybody have one?
I have one quick question, just for my sake of my notes. Presuppositions are number 4, as in ambiguities were number 3. So I'm just trying to make sure out of the 7, I have my things in order.
Yes.
Thank you.
Although there's no particular order, I have to tell you, Dalvin.
Well, I'm a little, I have my challenges.
You're much more organized than I am. That's why. That's why you have 50 people working for you. I couldn't stand that. It would drive me crazy.
I have people around me that are way more together and organized than I am, I assure you.
Good for you. That's the smart way to do things.
Yes, absolutely.
So is that the only question?
That was it.
Okay.
I'm also willing to try my hand at the at the thing.
The whole thing is, this is mix and match. This is to use all of them together, or just one. It just depends on the situation.
So I like the obviously. So that's what I said. So obviously, we are not here under the best of circumstances. Now, things tend to get better.
Yeah. It's the right format.
Sort of the format, but the end of it didn't really pull it together now, did it?
Well, because you went up a little bit. But that's natural because you're feeling your way. So if you said now things tend to get better, or things are trending better, right? Which is a little bit more accurate, more active in that case. So if you said, obviously, we're not here in the best of circumstances. Now, things are getting a lot better. Right? So again, it's pay attention to the tonality of it, but the format was correct. Right? And if you were using that with somebody in business, is obviously you came to us for a reason. Now we want to work together with you to get you the best product that you know, to make your business even better than it was before. Something like that, right? Really very simple, very easy, but it's using the tonality, using the the ambiguity of now, right? Obviously you came to us for a reason. Now let's work together to get this going. Or something. Very easy, right? Joanne, do you have a question? Obviously she had one for Robert. Joanne, do you have a question? No.
You want to see the bread?
Yeah, we all want to see the bread. Let's see the bread.
I got it.
Nice. Came out great.
Yep.
I'm gonna get my teeth into that.
See, it's like heart-shaped, and
Yeah, I know. It's
there's
terrific.
a smaller one on the side there.
That's a roll, and that's a loaf.
Excellent. Well, congratulations, Robert. That looks really good.
Thank you.
Looks yummy, Mark Young said.
See, everybody likes fresh bread.
Oh, yeah.
That middle section that was sort of rolled up, I could just tell how soft and fragrant and perfect sponge
The,
must be.
the little roll is cute too.
Yeah, it is.
I have
That's
one
my
here.
honey.
I have a
Come
sentence.
come into the picture and say hi. Okay.
I'm coming.
There he is.
Hi.
Right. You don't
So
really
I've been
flower all over.
listening, and I've been really enjoying what I'm hearing, James.
Oh, good. Well, this is going to be the next thing, right? Oddly enough, it fits with the bread. And what is that for you hypnotists? Utilization, right?
Let me turn the page.
Utilize the things around that are going on around in order to deepen the trance. And so what we're going to talk about next is creating realities. And part of creating realities is making what you're saying much more interesting. Because I think there's a tendency for a lot of people to really kind of want to convey information, and it becomes very dry. You know, it becomes kind of like a checklist of facts, as opposed to making it sound really, really interesting. And I did a video on story a little while ago.
I didn't spell it right. Realities.
Oh,
And I did a little a video on stories that you guys were part of, some of you. And you can go back and look at it, because stories are the package that we use in order to convey information. It's the packaging, it's the delivery system that makes it really interesting. Why do movies make more money than documentaries? Generally because they're more interesting. Right? Why do TV shows like, some of the long running series, and I was watching some of them over the weekend because had terrible weather here. We had winds up to 70 miles an hour here yesterday, if you can believe it, which is pretty bad. Why do those do better than news shows? Generally is because they're interesting. They capture our interests. They engage our senses. That's the reason why video games are now more popular and make more money than movies, is because they engage the senses differently. A lot of things are first person as opposed to third person. So you're associating as opposed to dissociating. You know, when you're in the movie theater, you're much more associated than when you're at home watching TV. When you're looking through VR glasses, you're much more associated than you would be even watching a computer screen. And that's why some people get nauseous through motion sickness because of VR glasses. But it's becoming something that's very much more popular in Asia and Japan and stuff like that. They have arcades where they have these VR things going on. And people actually pay money and they have parties and, you know, they do there and, you know, they're in their VR world. And it's about engaging the senses. So how do we do this conversationally? Well, because we're talking to the person. And when we're talking, we can describe. And when we describe things vividly, it creates that type of world in the other person's imagination. Now, when you bring them into trance, it compounds that and makes it even more powerful. But who here has listened to sports on the radio? Maybe when you were young growing up, and you listen to, like, if you've ever listened to like baseball, especially, those guys are really good on the radio. The way they describe what's going on, not only with the players, you know, and the pitcher's winding up and the crowd is, they talk about all the different things that are going on. And it's like you're there because in your mind you are. And it's creating a reality around what's going on or where you want that person to be. Now, if you're bringing somebody into trance, one of the really good ways to enhance this and enhance any communication is to make the words sound like what they mean. So when we're listening to like a news program, it's generally very dry. You know, people just reading something happened, blah, 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 you know. But when you're listening to somebody tell a story really, really well, it goes back to when we're kids and listening to stories. And when somebody who's really good is able to make the words sound like what they mean, it becomes very powerful for us. So if I was talking about the fox was really quick, right? Quick sounds like quick. Or, you know, they took this really long journey, right? It sounds like what it means. And when we talk about the fragrance of the bread and how wonderful it smells, right? You're imagining it in your brain because it's the descriptive quality of the words that allow that person to experience what you're describing. And when you're describing something to somebody in trance, they're really experiencing it very strongly. And so as you lead that person into trance, whether it's in a business situation or whether it's in a therapeutic situation or just an interaction, using the words descriptively the way they sound really enhances that for the person. So if you're talking about, you know, a really long journey, right, with a lot of wonderful things, it's different from saying a really long journey with a lot of really nice things, right? It's a different experience that you have emotionally to it. And so if you're talking about a business deal and you're saying, oh, you know, I'm really looking forward to us working really closely together because that way we'll come up with the best product, as opposed to, yeah, I'm really looking forward to us working closely together. We'll come up with the best product. It's a different impact that your words have on that person. right? And again, when you start describing the types of things you could do in very descriptive language where the words sound like what they mean, then it becomes very powerful in that way. And when you're doing it, you know, in a public speaking situation, or when you're doing it in a therapeutic situation, or just when you're talking to your clients or the people who work for you, your employees, it becomes compelling because you're somebody they want to listen to, as opposed to somebody who's just droning on in the background. And so what would some of the ways we would add more weight to some of these words be? Yeah, anybody have any suggestions on some of the words to make them sound like what they are? Like if you said, oh, you know, that was a very smooth ride, but a bit loud, right? So again, you know, if somebody has some very harsh criticism, or that was just a really easy test, right? So you notice you have a different reaction just from the way the word sounds when you make the word sound like what it means. Is there any questions on that one?
You were perfectly clear.
Yes.
What's it called? This.
I'm sorry?
What is it called, James? This.
It's making words sound like what they mean.
How'd you say that in one word?
It's
Congruence.
using
Tonality. How about this?
It is
congruence.
It goes towards congruency, yes, but in a lot of ways it's the packaging around the words. It's giving emotion to the communication, and that gives it much more impact and much more interest, you know, to the listener. So you know, if you're going to tell your team that you're excited about something, right, excited about a new project, excited about, you know, a new business, right? If you say, yeah, I'm really excited, we got some new business. You think everybody's going to get excited around that? Not really, you know. But if you say, look, I'm really excited, we got some new business, so let's take care of this. Let's sit down and talk about it. Well, all of a sudden, it's more compelling to them, right? Like even in Mark's chat, when he says, looks yummy, right? It actually, that word has a lot of semantic density to it, but it doesn't, when you're speaking it, and you don't use that density properly, it kind of just gets passed off. Looks yummy, right?
Yummy.
Right. If you say it looks yummy, right, where there's push to it, that gives it that type of connection to the other person, the listener. Make sense? Okay. So now we're going to start packaging this together because we have 20 minutes left. And that goes towards how we use rhythm. Because when we learn how to speak rhythmically, that's where we can really use pausing. That's where we can really use that, which is analog marking, that allows us to use our embedded commands and our embedded questions. It allows us to speak in a way that makes it very compelling for the person to listen and concentrate on what we want to say. And it's very important that you learn to actually be cognizant of the rhythm you're speaking at, which is generally not on the beat. So in musical terms, if you speak on the beat, then you are rapping. So that is not necessarily the best way to use conversational hypnosis, right? And so when we're speaking in rhythm, it's really easy to start sliding all of these things in because we can talk either slow and speak in rhythm, or we can speak fast and speak in rhythm. It doesn't matter this about the speed, it matters about the rhythm that we're using in order to mark out those areas that we want the other person to listen to. And that's where we get to package in our tonality, whether we're using embedded commands or using embedded questions, because I'm not sure you're picking up all of this, but I'm actually using it right now. Because as you begin to really just make this part of the way you speak, then your language will actually become much more compelling as you're able to put in a lot of the commands and a lot of the embedded questions and get the person moving in the right direction where you want them to go. Because now you've already gotten an understanding of this. And as you use this more, the more you use it, the better you'll be at it, because it just becomes the way you communicate, as opposed to something you're trying to do. And so all it is just becoming an effective communicator. And now, as you begin to do this even more, you can just begin to relax and just let it flow through your mind and let all of these learnings and understandings continue to grow within your mind as you continue to use them even more. And you'll notice they just come out, because now that you've heard it, it becomes part of who you are. And as you do this, it just becomes easier and easier and easier, because every time you use it, it's only just naturally communicating even more than you did before. So, who picked up all of that stuff? And it's not weird when you do it that way. It's not using hypno voice or anything like that, because it's just the way you're communicating. Questions? Joanne, I think you're on mute if you
I just won't get good at this.
Well, it's about using it. So, why don't you give us some?
Okay.
Use any or all of these as these things we discussed today.
Okay. As you begin to look to naturally list the home now with me, it's all about having the courage to put up a sign on the lawn.
Okay, structurally correct. Now, instead of reading it, Richard, instead of reading it, just speak to us.
So James, as you begin to search for an agent, and you look for that decision to list the home with me, it's all about examining a person's track record, because sooner or later you're going to have to make this decision if you want to sell the home. And I don't know how quickly that will happen, but I do know that as I'm sitting here now and we look at your goal, examine the fact that you want to be in Arizona with your grandchildren. And as we focus in on that and bring that picture closer of your grandchildren with you, and you see that picture, make sure you're in the picture with them.
Okay, so slow down a little bit. right? And use the rhythm a little bit more because you started just speeding up,
Yeah.
right? So you're losing the areas where you can use your embedded commands that way because you sped up.
That's true. I did.
And so if you even had like, now I know you want to move to Arizona to be with your grandchildren, right? Just that simple pause right there, right? Allows you to use your tonality more and really put it into rhythm.
I know you want to move to Arizona to be with your grandchildren.
Right, downward tonality, right?
For all the reasons they're important to you.
Downward tonality. You went up at the end. For all the reasons that are important to you, you know.
Yeah, for all the reasons that are important to you.
Right, that was much better. Right, so you notice how you can begin to use the rhythm in order to coincide with your breathing as well, which makes it a lot easier to use the command tonality. Because if we take too big a breath, it's hard to use command tonality because we're trying to hold the air in and it doesn't come out right, you know. So it's better to take regular breaths. It's kind of like swimming. Who here knows how to swim? Yeah, swim well? I don't swim well, but I do know that if you take too big a breath and you try to blow out the air while your face is in the water, it doesn't come out. So you take a regular breath, then it comes out. And it's kind of the same thing. I cheat. I use a swimming snorkel. So it's one of the ones that attaches to the goggles and it goes up. So I don't have to do the breathing and I can concentrate on just getting the exercise, which is what's important to me. And it's also finding the smart way to do it. And I very rarely end up swallowing all the water from breathing. Makes life a little bit easier. What can I tell you? So, anybody else want to give it a shot? Okay, great.
As you are sitting there with your eyes closed, listening to the sound of my voice, you begin to relax as you feel the chair beneath you.
Okay, very good. Just a little bit more downward tonality as you begin to relax. And you can just slow that down slightly just to mark it off for the person.
As you're listening to the sound of my voice, you begin to relax as you feel the chair beneath you.
Okay, now you can add one more thing. Let's just add one more thing. As you begin to relax, now you feel the chair beneath you.
As you begin to relax now, you feel the chair beneath you.
Right. You see how that actually just added, you added, let's relax. You added two embedded commands and an ambiguity in there. You know, that was really good. And you could do it if you want to do it as a preliminary. It's like, and the more I give, the more suggestions I give to you, the easier it becomes for you to accept them and take them in and be able to act on them. Now, just take a deep breath, right? Again, that ambiguity works really, really well on a lot of stuff, right? And it becomes just a little simpler than the standard inductions because it becomes more interesting. I mean, God, if I had to do this, standard element induction over and over again, like 5, 6, 7 times a day, it would be boring. Just this way it becomes more fun. I get to try something different each time. I don't have to remember the same thing all the time. Mark? Oh, Mark, are you?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. As we come to the conclusion of our presentation, now you want to consider the possibility of us working together and what that can offer you.
Okay. Yeah, structurally very good. Now just relax a little bit and pay attention to your tonality. So as we become to the end of our presentation now, I'd like you to consider the possibility of us working together. Right? So notice the tonality on that.
As we come to the conclusion of our presentation, now I would like you to consider the possibility of us working together and what the future can offer you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, structurally, that was good. And all you have to do is just, I would say, relax with your breathing a little bit more.
I gotta work on that. I gotta use those exercises.
You took too deep a breath, so it didn't allow you to speak in rhythm. And that's what happens if we take too deep a breath, because you have a lot more control over how much you breathe and how much you actually need the breath in order to speak. And as you get better at this, you'll start being able to control that amount of air a lot more than you did before. And it gives you a lot more flexibility this way in how you do it.
Wow.
All right. So
things to work on
is kind of one of the big keys that most people don't concentrate on when they're doing these things. And it's very, very important because, again, it gives you much better timbre in your voice. It allows you more flexibility in using the tonality, embedded commands, and all that type of thing. So there's a lot of things that are going on that I think would be useful. If just controlling your breath, it's going to be a lot better.
Breath control. Yes.
Right. And then, all the other stuff comes with it after that.
Excellent.
So, Gail, how about you? You are on.
Wait, I have to figure out how to use my computer. They tell me a Mac is supposed to be really easy to use. And I've been using a PC so long, I think I've been brainwashed.
It's all the same. It's just the controls are on the left side as opposed to the right side.
And I'm so completely a right-oriented person. It's daunting.
Which was an ambiguity.
Did you like that?
It was very good.
Thank you. It's interesting that you bring this up. I was competing in a speech contest the other day. And
so were you all like trying to yell over each other?
Actually, no, it was the Toastmasters International motivational speech contest. So people were actually given their own 5 to 7 minute time frame in which to scream over themselves if they wanted.
I'm sure that happened.
Well, frequently we all put ourselves on mute and scream at the person speaking.
Oh,
does that count?
Yeah, that's where it pays not to know where the mute button is.
That's exactly my point. And the comment was made to me that, and I so loved this, I so appreciated that I got this feedback. They said, whenever you speak, I just close my eyes and I sort of drift off, because evidently I can tell a story in a way that makes people feel as though they're there, and yet it's their own situation that they're in.
Mhm.
And they come away with so many different layers of message. The title of the speech was Get a Dog. As in, get a dog, it'll be fun. And the person who competed against me, who actually won, had the universal be kind to yourself message.
Ah. So he wanted world peace.
Yeah, exactly. It's very much like, what was it?
Are we still training? Are we still
20
training?
years ago? Yeah, we are. He's laughing at me. 20 years ago, blah, 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 9/11, I win, right? So yes, blah, 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 world peace, I win. But they love the ambiguities.
Yes.
How's my tonality, by the way? I'm sort of getting over allergies.
Yeah, basically, I would suggest you relax your throat a little bit more.
It's
And take
pollen.
Well, I understand. Take a smaller breath.
Okay.
Like a shorter breath, like a regular breath, because that'll allow you to control it a little bit more.
Okay. Done.
Like that.
Oh, hello.
Notice the difference?
Of course.
Right there. Excellent.
Yes. Well, my dog came in. I'm always relaxed when my dog is here.
Well, there you go. That's why you should get a dog.
It'll be fun.
And maybe you'll have world peace.
Not this year, maybe next year. Thank you for this. It was very interesting in a way I hadn't really thought about a lot of things.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So any questions from anybody? Obviously, we still have a couple of minutes.
I have a question.
Then shoot.
In normal conversation, not normal conversation, when you're having a pointed conversation with someone,
yes,
what's the mental process you go through to choose your words so that they don't sound like you're specifically choosing them for that person? They come out naturally.
If you're having a pointed conversation with that person, then your words would be aimed at that person, wouldn't they?
They would always be aimed at that person. I'm not saying this well. There are times when I'm coaching someone when I want the words to be marked so specifically that I can see in my mind. There are other times when I am just getting to know someone and the words don't come out as I don't know, blithely. They don't come out as smoothly as I'd like them to, because I don't necessarily want them to be marked at that depth. I just want them kind of, when I talk to people, I want to see how easy it is to put them in a trance.
Oh, just tell them a story.
Fair enough.
Because then it's not marked that, oh, well, you should do this. Like, well, it's really interesting. I met this person. And this person was, very angry to begin with. And we're not quite sure why. But all I did was just tell him, relax. Everything's going to be okay. And he took a deep breath and he just started to relax. And suddenly his outlook changed. He smiled. And, we ended up having a really, really interesting conversation over a cup of coffee. So, would you like to get a cup of coffee? But they're all, you can do that. It doesn't have to be a deep story. It could just be something you're layering embedded commands into.
Okay.
All right. That's the old, my friend John pattern.
Yes. Of course.
All right. Any other questions? Dobbin?
Do you recommend writing these sentences out?
If it makes you feel better to do it, but I think it's very important if you write them down to realize that you don't want to use them as a script, because then it's not natural. It's important to just get the elements, practice each element, just like you were doing today. Just practice one of the elements at a time, and then practice one of the other elements, and then all of a sudden they just start blending together. It's really difficult when you try to do everything all at once, because right now we made 7 points right about this, and if you try to do 7 things at once before you get started, it becomes much more difficult. If you just concentrate for a little while on your breathing and your timbre and getting your tonality down, you practice that for a couple of hours, it becomes natural. If you practice your breathing for a little while, it becomes natural. Then you can practice your embedded commands and embedded question tonality, the downward tonality. Practice it for a little while, it becomes natural. And then all of them will start to come together if you concentrate on just doing one of them at a time for just a little while. Could be a day, could be half a day, could be only a couple of hours. Keep it fresh for yourself, and never take it seriously. It's always about getting better and taking those steps to get better. And when you do that, you'll be shocked at how quickly it comes together for you, especially if you're talking to people on the phone a lot, or on video, or seeing clients, because you have captive audiences. Then if you're seeing customers, you have captive audiences. So just play with one thing at a time, and very quickly it'll come together. I think that's one of the things that a lot of these trainings, they forget to tell you, is you get this whole huge body of information. They say go out and practice, but they don't necessarily tell you how to practice it. And my suggestion is one thing at a time. So practice one thing at a time and just play with it. To kind of enjoy, seeing what happens. Hey, I'm going to do this. Let's see what happens. I'm going to use this type of tonality. Let's see what happens. I'm going to slow down a little bit, see if people listen to me more.
Right.
Or I'll slow down and speed up. The thing is never to stay only in the same place, in the same rhythm, in the same tonality, because then it sounds like you're droning on. Whereas if somebody's following you, it's that kind of novelty of the changes that make it really interesting. And that's how really good conversations happen. Really good conversations are hypnotic, because you've all had really good conversations with people you're close to. And even though you weren't trying to do conversational hypnosis, all of a sudden an hour or two goes by and you didn't notice it, which is time distortion. But that's another phenomenon. But it was conversational hypnosis because you were just involved in it, and it flowed, and it went from this subject to that subject. We're taking the randomness out of it in this case by knowing the principles of how to do it. But ultimately, if you're not enjoying it, then the other person won't either. And so that's why do one thing at a time. Just practice one thing at a time. You'll get good at it really, really fast. And that's my suggestion on how to play with this, which is a lot of people don't tell you. So
Thank you, James.
for those of you who don't have my book, I know Joanne has it. I have a new book out recently called Influential Rapport. Very nice book. You see Joanne has it. It's also an audiobook. Oddly enough, I decided to go audiobook this time as well. Very cool. I didn't read it because I can't read things in sequence. I jump ahead, and then that's not how you do an audiobook. You're supposed to read the book. I might do it next time. We'll see. It depends how good an editor I get, because there'll be a lot of mistakes. I am putting together a self-help program which is going to be very cool, called tentatively right now, Be Yourself, because that is the type of advice that we all get from when we're kids. Is, oh, just be yourself. Just be yourself. Nobody ever tells you how.
I'm gonna ask you what that meant.
Well, nobody ever tells you how to be yourself, right? And so this is going to tell you how to be yourself, and that you're more than enough, so you don't have to be anybody else. And then Influence and Persuasion Boot Camp be coming up hopefully later this year as well. It's going to be an intensive cover, not only all this stuff, but all the other stuff, and then putting it all together.
Will there be an event, a physical event?
Oh, it depends if they allow us to physical events. I've got the equipment for physical events. I have one of those speakers with a single column.
Oh,
it's very cool. Got a great deal on it. By the way, Guitar Center is in bankruptcy right now, so you can get.
What's it called? GuitarCenter.com?
Yeah, well, Guitar Center has, it's a .com. It's quite a large organization that currently, reorganizing under Chapter 11 bankruptcy. But for a lot of gear, you can get, if you need gear, you can get some good stuff on that. I am not affiliated with them. Maybe I should be if I'm telling people this, but that's just how it is.
And so, are you doing it virtual then for now?
I probably will end up doing it virtual, yes. Okay, well, Gail, I know you got to run, but thank you for coming. I look forward to seeing you
One
again.
quick question.
Yes, of course.
Related to what we're doing. Because when I saw Richard Bandler, and you were there too, the lady who does the health thing, she said that when Richard Bandler's talking, or John, on the stage, you can actually feel, if you're near the stage, the whole stage is vibrating.
I think, okay, in all honesty, it's a little bit of an overstatement, but you got to remember they are mic'd.
That depends on what they had for lunch.
Well, we have stories about that one too. But they are mic'd as well. So, with a very large sound system. But it is about creating that. One of the whole point is to create that vibration in yourself where you have that type of resonance, where you can feel it all the way down to your feet.
Did you find this one?
And you'll practice. The more you practice that, you'll actually feel that, especially when you learn how to, get your posture right in order to take advantage of it.
In one or two cases, if it's a shrimp or
So, any other questions?
No, but thank you so much, James. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I will order your book.
Well, thank you very much. Reviews are appreciated.
And also let me know what you have going on with these events and stuff. I'll reach out and get in the loop.
I sure will. And, obviously look forward to seeing you at these again. This was fun.
Yeah.
See you in a couple of weeks, James.
All right. Every other week. We'll do
James,
this.
thank you.
All right. Thanks. It's great to
Thank
meet you
you.
all.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
I look forward to the next training.
Okay. Positive reviews always
Definitely.
appreciate it.